In my presentation today, I'm going to look at the background to urbanisation across the world, and in particular in China, where there's been a dramatic movement of the total population from the country to urban areas in recent years. I'll then move on to look at firstly, the economic impacts, and secondly, the environmental impacts of urbanisation in China. Okay, first, I want to talk about urbanisation in general, across the world. Since the beginning of the 20th century, the world's urban population has increased massively. For instance, in 1900, it stood at just 220 million. At that time, this was 13% of the total world population. By 1950, it had increased to 732 million, which was 29% of the total world population. And in 2005, this had risen to 3.2 billion. So in 2005, 49% of the total world population were living in urban areas. That's almost half the world's population living in major towns and cities. And according to the UN, this figure is likely to rise to 4.9 billion, or 60% by 2030, so nearly 5 billion urban residents. However, it's clear that urbanisation is not happening at the same rate across the world. So, if we look at the slide here, we can see an overview of the main urban areas. The largest urban areas are still mainly in the developed countries. The population of the world's largest urban area, Greater Tokyo, is currently around 35.6 million. But the newly industrialised countries are catching up very quickly. That's countries like Brazil, China, and India. As you can see, in 1978, 3/4 of the US population, so 75%, lived in towns and cities, but less than 20% of China's population lived in urban areas. By 2011, America's urban population had increased slightly to 80% of the total population, but it's now not really increasing. Over the same period, China's urban population increased to almost 50%, almost half of the population. The size of the population in China also means that a small percentage increase is a large number in real terms. It's estimated that an extra 350 million people will be living in cities in China by 2030. That would be a further 15% increase. So, moving on to look at the economic impacts of urbanisation. Now, you could say that urbanisation has been one of the main drivers of economic growth in China, and it's likely to continue to move the country forward. In the next 20 years, it's predicted that around 50,000 new skyscrapers will be built, and that there will be around 200 million new urban jobs. Urban populations consume more food, energy, and consumer goods than rural populations. For example, in China, the urban population eats 60% more meat than the rural population. Urban residents are also 25% more likely to have a refrigerator than people in rural areas. All of this is positive in terms of future economic development. Okay, that was the economic impacts. Next, I'd like to look at the environmental impact. There are obviously concerns about the negative effects of urbanisation. Overcrowding in cities, pollution, people consuming more resources. But there are also positive aspects to urbanisation from an environmental point of view. Firstly, the birth rate among urban populations usually falls, and in the longer term, this will reduce population growth. Secondly, a fall in the rural population means fewer people using the land for farming. And over time, this reduces the negative effects on the environment and the total amount of land used by the human population. However, the increased use of energy in urban areas and the increase in pollution means that cities tend to be warmer. City temperatures can be up to 1.3 degrees Celsius higher, and in the context of climate change, this can be seen as a problem. So, in conclusion, I would say that the process of urbanisation is going to continue. Currently, there are nearly 4 billion people living in towns and cities worldwide. There are environmental challenges, but also economic benefits. I think that if it's well managed, urbanisation will lead to increased health and prosperity everywhere, especially in the developing world.